Well, hi folks, here we are again cutting more firewood. As I said when I did the last video here, taking down that gray birch, that I was going to go after this black one, that's black birch that's sort of centered in your screen there. That's one that had a major branch rip off and there's a scar about halfway up, so it's never going to heal up properly and the tree will never be healthy. It's leaning, it doesn't have a good trunk for a saw log, so I'm going to take this one for next year's firewood too. The black birch will burn nice too, so hang in there, and hopefully this one will cut and drop easier than the last one did. Be back to you. Okay, we're ready to go. I got my cutting position in place. I had to hack through a whole bunch of those green thorn bushes. I hate those things, but I'm not going to bother to do a front notch because it's leaning so much. I know which way it's going to go. A back cut should be enough to just drop it the way I want it to be. We'll see how that goes. I'm just trying to save time in doing that. But, well, just watch. We'll see. So how was that? The tree falling right towards the camera. I did actually cut a little bit. I made a small cut in the front. Almost got the saw bound up there, you saw, because there was weight on it. But I was afraid that if I didn't at least score the front, what would happen is as I was cutting the back, that it would, as it started to go down, it would kind of kick back a little bit and pinch my saw on the back side. So I didn't want that. I wanted to make sure that it could drift away from the saw and not bind it up. So that worked. Fell about where I wanted it to fall. So now I have the job of getting it all cut up and loaded into the truck. So this one was fairly simple. It's a nice big trunk tree though, as far as the bottom section of it. So it'll give a fair amount of firewood. Birch isn't a bad wood for firewood. It's not as good as oak, but it does burn hotter and longer than, say, ash or poplar. Some of the what you'd call them the softer hardwoods, and they're different with the different species of birch. I know that varies as far as the BTUs. I can't remember which was the best, but so far this year you've seen me harvest a gray birch, a black birch I've already cut up and split a paper birch, and there's a lot of white birch here. So I have a variety of birch species to use, and so that should be good firewood for next year. I've got to try to get as much of this done today as I can. Tomorrow we get a rain/snowstorm coming in, and then the day after that we start the polar plunge, where temperatures just continue to drop for 3 or 4 days. So we're not as bad as some places in the country, but we're going to be well below zero a couple of these mornings. So I don't want to be out here working in that if I can help it. It's at least upper 20s today, so that's manageable, and there's no wind, so that makes a huge difference. But again, I'm working around the weather as always when you're out in the country and working outside. So I want to cut as much of this up today as I can. The smaller branches I'll just throw in the brush piles. Rabbits and other critters will like that because I'm creating kind of sanctuary for them a little bit, a place where they can hide and where they can get away from predators. You really don't waste anything out in the country like this. I mean, the wood, yes, that gets burned. It turns it into heat energy. The tops, they just will rot up and go back into the soil for nutrients. The piles of sawdust, that'll be here from me cutting this tree up. That'll stay in the ground. That will decompose and go into the ground and provide nutrients as well. So this is a good way to continue to keep your forest healthy and still provide for our needs. I'm sorry if some of the environmentalists don't like the idea of ever cutting a tree, but you have to keep your wood lots thinned properly. You've got to take out the diseased, you've got to take out the damaged, and then you will have healthier timber as a result. I don't manage this in the sense that I'm trying to get just one species to grow versus, cutting out all the others. I just let it grow naturally. One thing I have done here is, with the last time timbering, is some of the eastern hemlock around here is developing a fungus that rots the tops of the trees so that it stunts them from growing. So I had the forester take as many of the hemlock out, but I told him to leave as many of the white pine behind, as far as the healthy ones, the ones that weren't good enough for saw logs, or they weren't big enough for saw logs, excuse me, but that didn't have any diseases or anything. And what you can see in the foreground here is I do have some white pines growing. That I'm hoping that they will proliferate here and replace the areas where a lot of the spruce were. Some of the same critters will use the white pine as use the spruce, and also white pine grows a lot faster, so as far as for future saw logs, timbering trees, it'll grow faster than the hemlock. Excuse me, maybe I said spruce, I meant to say hemlock. So that's just one of the ways that I am managing a little bit what grows here, but it's only because of the disease. That's the same thing I did with the northern ash. I cut out a lot of northern ash trees because the ash borer was killing them all off. So rather than have them just stand in the woods and rot, might as well get out of them what we can. And I've also processed some for firewood, and if I see some more that are still here, I'll probably eliminate them. It's a shame that these kind of invasive pests are damaging our forests, but what happens is, with international trade, there's just no way to sometimes stop some of these critters from getting onto our shores from other parts of the world, especially the wood insects. I mean, they can be inside the wood of pallets, and then they get to a seaport and stuff is unloaded. The pallets are just cast aside or put on a pile or whatever, or reused, and then those critters can get loose and get into the forest. So that happens. We have other invasive shrubs and other invasive weeds that are growing here that are a problem. One of the things the farmers deal with here in their hay fields that they're constantly having to spray for is what's called mare's tail. It's a miserable, noxious weed, and it's very prolific, and yet it'll choke out all the good grasses. It's not good to feed the cattle with, and it'll choke out all the good hay like the orchard grass and the timothy and so on. And so that's a problem they've had to deal with. And again, that's just something that came out of nowhere. But this is life in the country. You have to manage the environment. It's not pristine. It requires human stewardship. It requires common sense care. And you can't be afraid to eliminate what needs to be gotten rid of to protect what is good. The same thing is true when it comes to animals as well. If nobody hunted the deer around here, we'd soon have a deer problem that was so bad that the farmers couldn't grow any grain fields. Diseases would come. We had an incident here a number of years ago with a deer version of mad cow disease that some of the animals we were afraid had that in their brain, that disease in their brain, and the Game Commission was very cautiously monitoring the harvest to make sure there was nothing there that was bad. But if you have overpopulation, diseases like that spread quickly, and they spread far and wide. So responsible management of the environment is the smartest way to preserve the environment for the future. This extremism nonsense by people who don't know any better just makes greater problems than exist. Look at the wildfires in California and other places in the Midwest. Because the environmental kooks don't want even dead trees cut, well, what you do is you just put more and more and more dead fuel in the forest, and when you get a fire, whether it's a lightning strike or whether it's an accidental campfire or what have you, you have so much more to burn hotter, and it burns longer, and it can't be controlled. If the forests are responsibly managed, that the dead stuff is taken out, the undergrowth is cleared away, you still have good habitat for the animals, but you have healthy forests. And when you do get fires, they're easier to put out. You don't have any loss of life. You don't have any loss of property, at least not as much. But what they dealt with this year was purely because of the environmental nitwits destroying what they're trying to preserve because of their stupidity. And then, of course, in California, once all the forests are burned down and the hillsides are burned off with all the fires, there's no root structure to keep the soil back, so that when they do get rain, then they get mudslides. It's a human-caused disaster. It has nothing to do with so-called global warming. It has everything to do with people who don't know what they're doing in positions of authority, making policy decisions that are just flat-out stupid. People who've been on the land for centuries, who want to maintain the land for their descendants who follow them, know better how to take care of land than what these people do. So that's where we should get our policy from, people who have lived there, who continue to live there. Because, look, I'm not going to do anything here to destroy my home for future generations. I'm managing it. I'm not going to worship it. I'm not going to serve it. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I can't touch anything here, and then just let assets go to waste. Fields that could be producing food just lie fallow, or forests with good harvestable timber just get old and rot and maybe cause fires. But if things are managed properly, you get a good result. The forests regenerate. In the 150 years my family has been here, seldom have any of us planted trees, even though we've harvested, because they self-plant. When you cut a large tree out of the forest, then that creates a sunlight hole down to the floor of the forest. Hundreds, if not thousands, of seeds that are in the ground will begin to germinate, and small trees and other shrubs will grow. Now, they'll choke each other out, and of course the most robust one will win as it develops its own canopy. But it's a self-planting operation. You don't have to do it. There's plenty of nutrients there. They self-fertilize because of, leaves that fall off, branches that fall off, etc. And it's self-sustaining if it's managed properly. So this other nonsense it makes no sense. It's people who are well-meaning, who are thinking with their feelings instead of having any real understanding and common sense rationality about how to manage the wilderness and nature, who are actually the ones who are destroying it, not the people who live here. And that's why I think it's important for the people who live in the country to take control of where we live. There's no reason that somebody in a 20th floor apartment somewhere who's a lobbyist or a bureaucrat should be telling me what I should be doing with my land or not when they don't have a clue. So, sorry about the rant, but since the tree fell so nicely and didn't cause any problems, I'll just start cutting it up, and thank you for watching, and please subscribe to our channel.